All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for so much for joining. We really appreciate you guys joining our webinar today, Disrupted Retail, How the Pandemic Exposed Retail's Hidden Inventory Distortion. I'm Greg Busick. We got Jerry Sheldon and Lee Holman from IHL. We're going to be on camera just for a little bit here in the beginning because it's really my fault. I find when I'm on camera for these webinars, I'm too concerned with looking at the camera and I forget my slides. So the webinar will go a lot better without looking at my face. And as I always say, I've got a face for radio and a voice for print. So I don't think that's too much of a loss there. So today, thanks so much to our sponsors, Cloudera and Itasca Retail. We couldn't do this without them. Certainly the business models have changed, and a lot of what we do now is webinars, and we're very, very thankful for them. The report is complete. You can get access to it on our website under Research and Advisory White Papers. You'll see it there, Disrupted Retail. And then we have a new one, Retail's New Normal, that is also there as well, that you guys can get access to the underlying research for that. Next, as always, we're going to have Q&A throughout the day, throughout the situation. And on your little guide for GoToMeeting, there should be an opportunity for you to ask a question. We certainly invite you to ask those questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we will answer those at the end. The number one question that everybody asks is, can we get access to the slides? Yes, you can get access to the slides. Those slides will be on our homepage, ihlservices.com. Go to the bottom of that page and you'll see replay webinar there. And so you'll see that data there. There's also a detailed spreadsheet that we do with our updated forecast that is available for our Sophia or MyIHL subscribers. That is on the website now with the updated forecast for that. And before we get started, just to let you guys know, our next opportunity is the rise of the dark stores, which will be looking at how the rise in all these customer journeys is creating a need where it's disruptive within the store, and there's a need to fulfill these electronic or e-commerce fulfillments through stores that really aren't open to the public, but only for delivery. And so if you'd like to be a part of that, the data is here regarding that, or you can reach out to us, myself or Jerry, just Greg at IHL Services or Jerry at IHL Services with that. So first, before we get started, we want to open it up for a couple polls, and I'm going to throw it out to Lee, and he is going to put the first poll up there and related to what we're doing now. Go ahead, Lee.
It's up.
So on a scale of 1 to 5, how well are stores you shop in stock on what you want to buy, when you want to buy it? So give you a couple seconds there. Just click on the screen. All right, Lee, go ahead and end that. Let's see what we get for results. If you could read those out, because it's real small on mine.
All right. From top to bottom, near perfect was 6%. Ranking.
Is that? Can you share? Let's share that. Can we share that? There we go. Okay.
So everything's so-so.
Near perfect 6%. Was that 51%?
For number, yeah.
For 3. So they're kind of in stock, kind of not in stock. So that's kind of while you're there. All right, Lee, let's go to the next. Let's go to the next poll.
All right, and this one's got to be the most important one that we're going to deal with today.
So those of you who are college football fans, Coach O, the national championship coach yesterday, said to the vice president, we need football. We need to play. This state needs it. This country needs it. And then he said, go Tigers. You know, so do you agree? Yes, no, or you don't care?
With the exception of the Go Tigers.
With the exception of the Go Tigers. There you go. All right, we'll give it we'll give it 2 more seconds. And see, we'd have 3 yes votes if we could vote on our side. So that would pump up the results a little bit more. But this gives us a feel for the audience. All right, Lee, go ahead and close that. So what do we end up with? 41% yes, 27% no, 31% don't care. What's wrong with you people? No, that helps us. That helps us a lot. So, all right. So moving on to the next slide here. Let's just start getting into things, and I'm gonna kill my webcam. We're just gonna kill the webcams at this point and just get rid of them. You know, a lot of times when we do these webinars, quite honestly, I like to be the guy with good news to cut through the data and show the good news. And unfortunately, the first 10 minutes of this, 15 minutes of this is not going to be great news with regards to what's going on with retail. That's why, for our sponsor's sake, I'm going to pause when we get to the actual inventory disruption portion so we can cut the webinar for their content. But I know about half of you are on here because you want an economic update of what's going on. So let's start by looking at restaurant bookings year over year, total restaurant bookings. Now this is open table data. This is reservations. We're still down in July over 60% year over year for restaurant things. Hotel occupancy rates, we're improving, but that started to flatten out in July. Still only about 45% of year last year. That's through SDR. Air travel, still really anemic, down about 68 to 70%. The one thing that is up tremendously is our home purchases are up, and you'll see that reflected tremendously in the retail data that came out in June. Next, what's the cause and what's the difference of what's going on in the retail economy? Well, according to Opportunity Insights, it's really the upper incomes. It's the top 25% incomes that are still not spending to the same level as they were prior to COVID-19 through this year. As you can see down here, the bottom quartile is about even there, but about $1.4 billion separates when it comes to the consumer side. Now it's come down quite a bit from where it was in April there, but it's the upper incomes that drive most of your specialty spending that is not happening right now. A lot of your restaurants and lodging and travel, that hit is because the people that make 6 figures aren't doing as much as they normally would be because of lockdowns and just, you know, curbing their expenditures. So let's look at the U.S. retail update, and we always do this as just a fast going through the data. So here's where we were in February, March, April, really tough for especially soft goods, coming back a little bit in May, and then this is where we ended up in June. We start to see a little bit more green here. So grocery up 11.4%, your mass merchants warehouse clubs up. There's some differences in data based on what the census reveals, and we'll go into a little bit of detail on that, what they reveal in the initial month, and then they come back and do a little bit later. Especially hard goods up 13.7%. In that area, it is DIY, Home Depot and Lowe's, they're up 22%, 22.4%. Excuse me, 22.8% for home improvement. Your sporting goods, which had a tough year last year, is up 22% there. And then your pure play guys up 30%. Now you'll notice that we did get a bounce back on especially soft goods there a little bit there, and department stores cut in half the decrease, but we're still down. And the unfortunate news is we've already seen announcements from many school districts that they're not going to open school in time. So between the increased lockdowns that we're seeing, particularly in California and Texas, Alabama has gone to a mask mandate. Nashville has locked down the bars again. In many of our cities, that's hurting data going forward, and it's not reflected here in the data from the census. It's reflected in our forecast, but it's not reflected in this data here. And as you quite imagine, restaurants down 26.8%. That's because fast food's doing quite well and not down much at all, but those table service restaurants are really hurting. The bars, the restaurants, particularly with the second shutdown, is just when you can only be at 50% capacity, when you can only be outside, it's just really, really, really tough to do. So where are we for the year? That puts us at the year, the pure plays up 18.4%, our groceries up, our mass merchants is up, but overall our the rest of the segments are down for the year. So we've got about 2.5 months of COVID impact reflected in this data now, but just gives you an idea where we are now. This shows you the delta of that, those click through the charts that we saw there, and it shows you in the food, drug, convenience, and mass merchant side of things. Convenience stores in a typical year actually lifts up retail sales, and it's been a big drag on retail sales. But as you can see, it's improving on a month-to-month basis that we've seen as people start to drive for vacations and start to get away. There, it's coming back, but the oil prices being down, on top of the fact that most people are not driving to work and still working from home, has kept that artificially low. There, we see the bump in grocery that's continued to be there for the year. It's good to be a grocery store right now in terms of things, but as we'll talk later in the webinar, a lot of money was left on the table due to out of stocks and overstocks. When you look at the general merchandise area, big improvements that we're seeing in the last month in terms of especially soft goods as well as department stores. However, looming in the front of us is that back to school season, and most everybody is saying electronics is going to have a huge boon there. So if you've got students and you're thinking about upgrading laptops, I would get them now and not wait till the tax-free dates, because I'm not sure those are going to be there by the time you try to buy the tax-free weekends because of shortages. So that's the data looking at it from there. We've updated our forecast here, deeper cuts in soft goods than we had, a little bit deeper in department stores. We've upped our supercenters and grocery segments there, and we've cut a little bit deeper in our restaurants and our entertainment and cruises. So this dropped from a -7.4 to a -7.6. We are predicting roughly a $500 billion drop from what our forecast was going into the year for North America overall. Now, this number does not include about $100 billion increase in e-commerce, pure play e-commerce numbers. So if you factored that in, down 400 billion for the marketplace. So 400 billion out of 5 trillion is bad, but it's not as bad because we're starting to get some rebound as a part of that. And this still, though, does not reflect an elongated downturn post September 30th, when the so-called second wave was supposed to happen. We figure it's our belief that we're just going to have to learn to live with this at different levels of opening rather than complete shutdowns of the economies. And as a result, we're reflecting that in our data. Worldwide, about a $1.6 trillion impact worldwide, a positive for the food, drug, convenience, and mass merchants. Once again, the drag being convenience stores and the gas there, where this would be up considerably higher. General merchandise losing $1 trillion, and hospitality 824 billion on a worldwide basis. This is the really tough news. In the past, when we've done this, we predicted the data that by July 31st, things would generally be open at 75% or more in all 50 states when we originally started this. However, with the subsequent re-lockdowns in California in particular, and Texas, Arizona, some parts of Florida, mask mandates that are limiting things, we had some internal discussions and back and forth here on the overall impact and loss of stores. And so our forecast now is a loss of 443,000 retailers, retail store locations across retail, hospitality, restaurants, and lodging. The vast majority of these being small retailers. This subsequent shutdown and closing of dining rooms that occurred, hair salons, barbershops, all those kind of places, spas, they just got the double whammy. There's no PPP money left for people who already took it. I wish I had better news. I just am really pessimistic about this for the small guy. The impact most heavily felt with the one store companies. We're predicting a loss of 337,000 locations there. Total, what is that, about 44,000, 45,000 enterprise locations there. The difference between our data and, once again, CoreSite's data is we are looking at all companies with 50 stores or more, not just public companies or large private companies. And we also include restaurants in our data. So that's why our number's a bit higher than CoreSite is for the enterprise numbers. But pretty devastating, the second lockdown being particularly in California. As you look at it by segment, you can see general retail and hospitality hit the hardest. Those food, drug, convenience, and mass merchants are going up, but those are mostly planned. It takes a lot longer for those stores to open than it usually does for a restaurant or a specialty store. And as a result, you can't have the upside as fast as you have had the downside. Once again, not all states are equal here. We have updated these charts and this data based on the fact that we're now looking at 6 months of lockdown timeframe versus 4 months as we were previously done. What this chart shows you is the effective complete lockdown of restaurants and malls. How many months there? So the way we calculated this is we had a 25% open, so a completely closed, 25% open, 50% open, 75% open, completely open over the 6-month period of April 1st to October 1st here. And so what we did is we spread this data across the states so that we could see, when we look at store closings, what states are most impacted and where those states have been impacted. A couple things that have happened other than just the lockdowns. As we mentioned in our previous webinar, the situation with the nature of the seasonal businesses that weren't able to open in certain locations before Memorial Day greatly impacted a lot of the northern states that only have a very limited seasonal period for those businesses, and that was a big thing. So what's the end result? The end result is that we're seeing big increases in failures in California and Texas and Florida in particular from these new lockdowns, up to 66,000 businesses closing in retail there. And sadly, it's not just the United States. Facebook opened their global state of the business, small business yesterday. The link to that is here. 35% of all small businesses that they surveyed around the world have had a sales drop of more than 50% due to the COVID restrictions so far. So the link is here. So when you guys get the slides, you can go with that. So what does recovery look like? Many of you have seen this chart before. The impact of the second lockdown, we believe, is going to delay us by a good quarter and a half of getting back to 2019 levels. So it's important to note this. This is not, hey, what's our growth getting positive again? No, the way we look at it, I think is the better way, which is, when do we get back to what we were doing before COVID in 2019? So we're thinking late first quarter of 2022 that we will get back completely across all of these segments. So you see the big bump in the food grocery, that stays positive, the big drops that we have in restaurants and department stores, and that moves up higher. there. So we believe that's the impact of the US. This is the first time we're showing recovery curves for each of the regions. So EMEA didn't have the spikes and didn't have quite the same drops as well. We're predicting that they're probably about a quarter ahead of the US. In Asia, in the Asia Pacific area, there we expect them to come back first. And that has to do with the fact that most of these are emerging economies and they didn't have as deep of a downturn when COVID hit those areas. So we're expecting early third quarter, so about a year from now, when we expect Asia to go positive. And Latin and South America, unfortunately, because so much of their stuff is related to travel and tourism from the United States and Europe, we don't believe they're going to fully recover until 2023 to get back to those levels. So we will need a vaccine and we'll need time before they get back to that level. Worldwide, what this shows is about second quarter of 2022, second to third quarter, that we would get back to normal or 2019 levels there. So with that, that is the discussion on the economic update and the negative news. And now we're going to get into the actual data for what the topic of our discussion is today, which is disrupted retail and basically the pandemic, inventory distortion, and how that's been affected through things. So let's start off with the fact that we've been doing this for 14 years now, studying inventory distortion. Started out of a Wharton case study that showed a retailer that they thought they were in stock 92% of the time, but their customers actually said they were only in stock 75% of the time. And so we decided to start studying this as a phenomenon worldwide through surveys of both retail professionals as well as consumers. And the good news is we have been making great strides prior to the pandemic. In fact, from 2017 to 2020, we estimate an improvement of about $158 billion in reduced losses across retail as a result of better forecasting, the leveraging of AI, RFID, computer vision, et cetera, tools there, particularly in Western European countries, as well as in North America, then Korea and Japan in particular, with tremendous increases in those systems that occurred. But then COVID-19 happened, and we had this massive explosion of the supply chain. So wanted to start off by just explaining a little bit of the way the supply chain is now, with particularly with China and Asia producing so many goods and services for North America. So in the U.S. in particular, so this applies to the U.S. It's somewhat similar to retailers all over the world. But generally, you have 4 months of supply in the supply chain within the country. There's a 1 month supply at the manufacturer's warehouse there in country. You've got another month's supply of a product that's usually in a wholesale distributor somewhere. Then there's the retailer's own warehouse that usually has a month's worth of supply. And then you've got 2 weeks to a month's supply, depending on the type of retailer at the store level. The problem with that is we had a 2-week period in March, and that was a little bit earlier in Europe, where all of a sudden there was massive demands for everything from toilet paper to hand sanitizers, disinfectants, cleaners, steaks, frozen pizza, etc., up to 600% increase in those things. And effectively, we took a 4-month inventory and reduced it, completely exhausted it within a 2-week period of time. And because of the fact that the manufacturer to the world, China, leading into that was shut down for 2 months, there became this huge gap in between. And the end result was an improving inventory distortion period just got simply blown out of the water. And so we were at 1.4 trillion, expecting to be down under $1 trillion this year worldwide, even with growth in some of the emerging markets. that we actually are now showing upwards of $1.8 trillion in losses due to out of stocks and overstocks. Now, it's just a little bit of definition. So our definition of out of stocks, as you'll see when we get into that, is not just empty shelves. We look at other reasons why somebody came in to buy something and left without buying it for reasons other than the fact that the price was too high when they went in to buy it. So when you go back to our poll, even among the group that's on this webinar, it looked like 50% of the people, it was about 50% of the time that the retailer actually had what we wanted to buy there when we wanted to buy it. We're actually a little more generous than that. I think we've got it somewhere around 78% in the model overall. But $1.8 trillion there. Now, overstocks as well. So overstocks in our definition are discounts above what were planned discounts anyway within there. So we say in the game, 25% discount is pretty average for things, particularly when you get to clothing and stuff. In fact, it was First Insight that did a study this week, and they showed that the typical consumer in apparel will not buy until it's over 30%, usually 35 to 40% off. They won't even buy items there. There's a big difference between men and women related to that. When it comes to any of the categories, the men will tend to buy at less of a discount there than the women will buy for each one of these things, and they will hold out for a greater discount. There's all kinds of stuff you can go into regarding that. So $1.8 trillion impact due to out of stocks and overstocks. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of 10.3% of retail sales or 10% of same-store sales for your typical retailer that is lost due to out of stocks and overstocks. Or another way to put that, retail's loss overall for inventory distortion is greater than the GDP of Canada. To put that in perspective, greater than the entire GDP of Canada there. It's just a huge problem in retail, and one that we have solutions that can attack, and that's the purpose of this webinar. So how's it look regionally? The biggest area by far for out of stocks is Asia. Europe, EMEA is second, and North America is third there. Like I said, there was a lot of gains and a lot of improvement in North America, Western Europe, but these regions are so big, and we've had modern retail that was starting to pick up, but it was growing faster than the optimization of those types of things. So what are the categories and the reasons for out of stocks? Well, the area that blew up was the empty shelves. And this was almost every bit of the growth due to the pandemic is related to increases in empty shelves here. We've seen improvements in many years where the staff was there and they couldn't find the item. The dreaded, the system says it's there, but I can't find it situation. Great improvements had been made there. Couldn't find anybody to help. We were really shocked the last time we did this that were great improvement in terms of staffing levels, even with the challenges of getting people to work in different retail environments previous to COVID there. And then a couple other reasons. When you get into overstocks, Asia, once again, is a huge problem with overstocks, and the data relatively aligns here. But when you get to overstocks, now you have issues related to infrastructure, spoilage, theft issues, losses. Did we just not, we bought way too many, we got a deal, we bought way too many and didn't sell them, etc. So we've got to go to excess overstocks. Now, as we're looking at this data for this year, certainly when you get into fashion, you've got those situations where you've got that Easter dress is not going to get bought as an Easter dress. Now, the question is do you discount that dramatically? Do you just hold that stock for next year and pay the inventory cost? Or do you give that to a third party or a wholesaler? Or does that find its way to TJ Maxx and, Ross stores? there. Those are the challenges that a lot of retailers are facing right now. So the spoilage and the sell-by dates grew dramatically during this period of COVID, and that's caused a big issue because essentially 2 months of a season was gone with lockdowns of malls all around the world. And so working through that inventory and getting that inventory and the discounts related to that is a big part of it. Spoilage is still a big problem in Asia, particularly when it comes to some of the infrastructure situations there. A lot of produce never makes it to market for challenges related to that. Buying and planning issues, just bad forecast. We just forecasted wrong and had way too many, winter coats when it was warm. Those sort of things. 174 billion there. Supplier issues where they sent way too many items there. Personnel issues. Marketing being disconnected from the actual supply chain. A lot of times what happens is you've got promotions that are set, but it doesn't hit the dock in time and they didn't communicate. And so the promotion happens, you're out of stock there, but when you get the merchandise in, you've got no ads to drive interest. So you have to discount that even further. And that's where those improper marketing things there. We've made some big improvements there with those communications throughout the system and inventory visibility that has helped there. So a lot of the big things that have happened that have blown out due to COVID have been related to the top two, actually top three issues on this chart particular. So how big has the COVID piece been and the big pieces of that? And it really is a huge number. We estimate that $570 billion can be directly attributed to the surge and or lockdowns when it comes to out of stocks and overstocks for retailers and restaurants due to the pandemic. Just a staggering amount. And once again, without that, we would have seen a significant decrease and a significant improvement worldwide in this area with better technology. The one thing that has happened though as well that COVID experience is releasing previously hidden areas of things. And so we've got all these new customer journeys, click and collect, local delivery. Those things during the pandemic grew 350 to 400% for retailers like Target and Walmart and Kroger there. In the process, however, it exposed things that were previously hidden when you were walking through the store. So the typical consumer, let's say you're looking for Kellogg's, or let's say it's Post a Raisin Bran is what you're looking for in the store. If for some reason Post Raisin Bran is out of stock, you typically in most modern retail areas have 10 other choices of Raisin Bran and 20 other cereals to choose from. So when you're walking through the store, they're out of that, you just pick something up and you go. And the retailer has no record of that. They have no knowledge of that whatsoever. However, when you're in a click and collect situation now, you specify Post Raisin Bran. While the shopper goes to the shelf, there's no Post Raisin Bran. So they have to communicate back to you and say, hey, we don't have it. Would you take Kellogg's Raisin Bran, or would you take the generic Raisin Bran there? Well, each of those products have different prices and different margins that are associated with that. So you've added labor to the equation. You've also may have to make a choice between, do I eat the margin and give the higher cost item for the same price? Do I force them to pay the new price there, or do I cancel the item and force them to go somewhere else for that? And so the end result of that is there's a lot of overstocks that you just didn't even know about as a retailer that were hidden. So of that 570 billion impact, we anticipate that 505 billion of that was just due to overstocks, and 15% of that is what was previously hidden out of stocks that were hidden because people were walking through the store and they were getting those things and making those decisions otherwise. So it's really provided the need to get to better accuracy of the data at the store level and really knowing what your inventory is. And it's not just the out of stocks and the inventory there. If you haven't optimized the journey overall, this is the typical loss in points margin per order if a retailer has not optimized these different new journeys. And this is compared to a customer walking in the store. So the typical click and collect order loses that retailer 4.2 points of margin over a traditional walk-in store visit there. The local delivery is 8 points of margin lost there. Now you can optimize that and get that stuff back, but it's kind of an incremental added to. Now we don't add this dollar value to the inventory distortion. It's just a double whammy that's out there. And we have a lot of vendors that come to these webinars. These are the areas where you can expect retailers to be investing a lot into, is making these more efficient. Because by optimizing these going forward and being able to support the consumer any way they want to shop, it makes a huge difference with regards to the success of the retailer, particularly in a business that has a penny profit to begin with in many situations. So what are the solutions that you can do to go after things? Without question, the first thing when it comes to inventory distortion is getting to a maniacal focus of getting to clean and accurate inventory data, knowing the truth and getting to that and having accurate data regardless of where that stuff is. So the first step of that was getting to a single version of the truth, a single view of your inventory across all of your channels. But a big part of this is the cultural change that's required on process, not letting consumers, just because there's a Diet Coke and a 2-liter Diet Coke, Diet Dr. Pepper, Coke, and Sprite, they can't all be rung up under one. They've got to be rung up separately there so that the inventory doesn't get whacked. The ability to go in and look at that inventory regardless of where it is in the store, so to be able to leverage technologies like RFID, computer vision, other IoT products, sensors, cameras, robots, video analytics that are required. Anything you can do to get to that accurate inventory there. And then it gets into the architecture aspect of it. Is, can you process that data just in the cloud or in your internal servers, or do you need to move to edge computing? We've seen a 300% improvement, or excuse me, a 300% increase in the adoption of edge computing at the store level to process all those sensors to get to that single version of the truth there. And certainly the cloud is part of that. A big part of the growth rate that's occurred and the improvement that has occurred has been around the area of forecasting, analytics, the computer aided ordering, their automated ordering, AI and ML. Once again, these are all great. Our sponsors specialize in that and ask you to go check out their solutions for sure. They're installed, they're making big progress, but they're completely limited based on whether or not you've got clean data up top. And so otherwise you're making bad forecasts and stuff based on bad data, and you've got to get to that clean data. So if you're going to start somewhere, get the truth, get the clean data on your stores and what's going on there. So as I mentioned, that measure, improving, get that true data. Then there's the aspect of, you've got to be able to trust the data internally. We heard stories of retailers where the computer-aided ordering said you need to buy 40 times the volume of what your typical order is, and merchants, they canceled the orders. And as a result, during the COVID explosion of that 2-week period, that retailer lost out on the merchandise from the wholesalers that they could have gotten and sold in their stores. So that cultural change there with the merchants, a lot of who went to college where math wasn't required, there's oftentimes a distrust of the data. So if you've got accurate data, you can start applying that forecasting thing. Then you've got to work on the culture for people to trust the data, but continually refine that data there. And then that allows you to bring in trusted external big data sources of data that could have helped quite a bit when it comes to COVID impact and reactions by looking at what was happening in Asia or in Europe if you were a retailer in the US. And why this is so critical, we're just going to end on this, is at IHL, we firmly believe the next battleground for the next decade is going to be related to the ability to apply AI and machine language on store operational issues and store inventory issues there. From 2015 to 2020 was all about single version of the truth and unified commerce. Then we moved into giving our associates better inventory visibility, better tools, save the sale things. So some of that was still going on depending on the segments. Then we already saw, Walmart in particular leading in this area, and some of the specialty stores like Levi's and others deploying, Macy's being another one. When they start deploying RFID and computer vision, you've got the Bossa Nova robots going up and down, and now those things are now starting to have LiDAR as a part of it. So that combined RFID computer vision type of solution to get all of that inventory within the store and getting that to understand specifically where are my holes, but what is my accuracy and how many do I have on the shelf there, and then I can fulfill that item any way the customer wants to do it. If I need to ship from store, whether I need to order more there. But we believe the next frontier and battleground is ability to get that data and applying AI and ML on that. And all the big retailers, all the ones that are benefiting from COVID right now, tend to be way ahead of other retailers when it comes to the ability of that. And quite frankly, it's our belief it's almost game over when they can get those things done, because the machine and the ability to make those forecasts is at a much greater and faster ability than anywhere else. So with that, that's our core stuff. We're going to turn the cameras back on if I can figure out how to do that again, and we're going to go to Q&A. Lee, Jerry, if you guys want to come back in for that. Once again, the deck is going to be on our website here any second. That'll be up there, and the data for our subscribers will be on the portal. It's actually already on the portal regarding the economic update there. So with that, I'll see if I can get to a point where I can actually see Lee and those guys. I can't actually even see it. So
We're here.
am I on screen?
You are actually.
You're there, Greg. You're good.
Okay.
All right, I'll just smile because I can't see either one of you.
All right, well, let me go ahead and launch that. I'll send this one to Jerry first. First question is, are you seeing technology implementation that is happening now that were sort of prevented by unions or not politically expedient before the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. I think kind of one of the first and foremost examples that most of us are aware of on the call is Walmart. It was about 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, they introduced a self-checkout only store. I remember when I first started here, we'd get calls from reporters, and they had invariably, when they asked about self-checkout, kind of the slant that they would take is that this was a labor reducing issue, when the reality was that it wasn't reducing labor, that retailers were incorporating self-checkout to reallocate labor to more value-added services. So when you take that as a backdrop, when we talk to the self-checkout companies, they've just really been having a hard time keeping up in the last couple of years. And I think as you have the opportunity to kind of reduce some of the points of interaction, given the current pandemic, that self-checkout continues to make a lot of sense, and we're going to continue to see that acceleration. Next, Best Buy. Electronic shelf labels for the first time. I mean, historically, if you've gone to the holy grail of cameras in New York, B&H Photo, you've seen a great implementation of electronic shelf labels. If you've been to maybe your Kohl's, you've seen ESLs, but generally speaking, ESLs have been really few and far between in North America, whereas if you go over in Europe, 15 plus years ago, they've been very pervasive, especially in the grocery space. Well, historically, unions would view these as things that would take, they would reduce labor, so they were kind of viewed as taking jobs away. where again, in reality, it was a reallocation of labor. Another example, White Castle. White Castle burgers, they're testing Flippy, the robot burger flipper. If you haven't seen that, look it up. Hilarious, but reduces human contact. So, again, in the previous context, maybe not something that would be accepted very readily, but in the current context of what's going on, yeah, people want to reduce that human contact. In grocery mass, they've hired over 1 million new employees. So that kind of helps soothe some of the union's concerns. And, in a lot of aspects, especially as Greg kind of went through some of the economic realities that we're facing, is that when you have a choice and when unions have a choice of, hey, am I going to get behind something that either is going to lose a few jobs or going to lose a lot of jobs, then they're absolutely going to apt to kind of get behind or not make a big deal out of, just the loss of potentially a few jobs because of technology. Again, and the reality is that it's oftentimes not lost jobs, it's reallocation of labor, not reducing labor. So long story short, yes.
Okay. Second question here. When it comes to big numbers in Asia, can you reiterate the reasons for such a large disparity versus the rest of the world? Let me try that one. The region in the Asia Pacific region is very much in a developmental phase. It's the middle class is growing, incomes are growing for those folks. Organized retail is expanding, and it's pushing out some of the the traditional retail, the stalls and markets and so forth and so on. And as a result, the retailers that are on the ground already, they're doing everything they can to grow their footprint. And so, it's more for them, it's more a matter of let's get the store built and have it populated, as opposed to let's optimize everything that's going on in there. So that's part of what's going on there. And if you think about it, it's not unlike what happened here in this country when COVID came about. Every retailer worth his salt and every restaurant and everything else that was out there has done everything they could to make a quick pivot to bring on board new customer journeys, whether it's curbside pickup or buy online pickup at store or click and collect, what have you. Every retailer has been trying to do that and just get it done and in place so that they can make the sales. Optimization is going to have to come later once things settle down to a dull roar. The second part of that, it has to do with infrastructure issues in across the entire region. And we're talking about refrigeration, we're talking about spoilage and things of that nature. And one of the data points that we had here was that 40% of produce in India spoils before it ever gets to the market. Now that's 40%. Now that's a big country, a lot of people there. That's an awful lot of food that goes to waste. And it's that's part and parcel why the numbers in Asia Pacific region are so big right now. Next question. One of the things that that came up as you were talking about the 4 months of supply chain there, Greg. Somebody asked, given the nature of the once in a century pandemic, what can retailers do to better anticipate a crush of that 4 months of inventory in the pipeline down to 2 weeks? What can be done to prepare for demand like that in terms of supply chain?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it a little bit there right after this question came in, but it's the ability to have a solution that allows you the flexibility of bringing in outside data. So you've got your internal data nailed, but you get the outside data that comes in that shows that, hey, there's an inflection point. We're seeing this inflection point that's occurring when you have a pandemic like this, where it was rolling through different areas of the world. The ability to get that data and then make better accuracy and better forecast and get those orders in fast, because what this really turned into was how fast can you get to the wholesaler before your other competitors can get to your wholesaler and get that inventory. So it's those external data sources that can be utilized most often through a cloud interface API that you could also add to what's going on to put into your forecast going forward.
Okay, and related to that, should we expect more retailers investing in logistics going forward, smart warehouse technologies, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. But I expect that to be in the case. Anything related to these digital customer journeys are going to be in optimizing those are going to be the areas where we see the greatest piece of it. However, I expect the priority to be the last mile first, being the area where that is focused on it, because where retailers got hit the hardest, well, it depends on which segment it was. In fact, some of the fashion retailers couldn't get to their inventory because it was in the stores. But where most of the out of stocks occurred, it was because you couldn't get the stores didn't have that information, there. So I expect to see dark stores that are there, but I expect to see investments in those digital journeys that have a last mile component that is spaced at the store level, because that's the key advantage over Amazon is proximity to the customer. And so you optimizing those, taking advantage of those, I think will be first.
Yeah. A couple folks have asked about RFID. One of them asks is RFID going to play a big part in the new economy? I guess new meaning post-COVID. And the other is, it has to do with, deployments of RFID is specifically in the fashion space.
The answer is yes. RFID is an absolutely critical technology to getting to the accurate inventory. I think fashion's got, lots of issues, most notably, the private equity. There's good private equity and bad private equity. Lee, what is it? You looked at it, and 29% of our enterprise retailers in fashion now are owned by private equity companies. Typically the MO is loading up those guys with debt. That's the biggest issue for a lot of those guys. But after that, then it is related to inventory and the speed at which they can manage that inventory and capture every sale related to that item there.
Yeah. This was a comment. I think this was Healy that offered this. He said, "Thanks for mentioning Canada."
I love Gary Fraser. Thanks. How did I know what Coach O said without a translator? I was just reading the article. I didn't actually hear it, so I'm assuming they had that translator.
I guess this is a clarification point. When we're talking about the 437,000 stores or whatever the number happened to be that we were saying closings, that is the number closed as a result of COVID. That's not
what that is. I see that Barry asked that question. Barry, what that is based on the 6-month period that we talked about, how many stores through the end of the year will be closed as a result. So our estimate is about 130,000 of those 443 have closed to date and will not reopen. But it's how long can they last? How long can they hang on there? Like I said, most notably the restaurants at 50% capacity or a specialty store, how long can they last if they can only sell out at the door and then not, or only online? So this is our prediction based on the drop in sales, the average sales per store for that, and just a realization that, it's one thing for an owner not to take a paycheck. It's another thing when he goes negative and having to, take out more loans just to survive. At some point, they give up on the dream. Now, the good news is we lose, I don't know if it's good news, but we lose about 100,000 of those small guys. So it's about 3.5 times the number that we normally lose during a year. And those guys come back, new people take their place very, very fast. At the enterprise level, it's actually slower to recapture those losses. So I think we had 40,000 that we were predicting there. Yes, there are others that come in to take their place, but it's a little longer time for those, maybe a year difference in terms of getting back those numbers.
Yeah, the main point being that's what we're estimating just due to COVID.
Correct.
Right?
It's the impact, yeah, due to COVID, right?
Yeah, so that's somewhat independent of the debunking stuff that we do, you know, store openings, closings, and so forth.
Right, right.
Next question. Someone asked specifically, have you seen any numbers relating to the uptake, or I guess they meant uptick in Apple Pay this year? And then the follow-up question was, what do you see as the future of physical cash in the retail store?
Yes, there's been an uptick in contactless payment, Apple Pay being a part of it. So certainly there's been a move there. You know, it's really interesting. There are some who want to get rid of cash altogether. And this is, I think, a great example of where, you know, we talked about how Jerry mentioned how certain retailers get a pass because of COVID to deploy technologies and deploy things that they would have wanted to do that may have been blocked because it wasn't politically expedient within the chain to do so, or they're in survival mode. A lot of government organizations have been pushing back and saying, hey, we don't want to take we don't want you to say go to cashless because it disenfranchises those customers who don't have bank accounts, and it's you know, it's discriminatory in doing that. However, all of a sudden when it comes to safety, now they get a pass to start doing that. So it's certainly been an area I know Ingenico has seen, you know, rapid increases in sales and NCR and others when it comes to the PIN pads and the adoption of the NFC and things there with contactless and Apple Pay being a part of it.
Yeah. We have a question. What digital natives are best positioned to take advantage of the current online trend? And follow up to that was, how does inventory distortion affect online sales?
Well, it depends on where your inventory is. So it depends on, are those online sales, are you delivering them from the store or are you delivering them from a warehouse or fulfillment center? Inventory distortion happens everywhere. You know, if you're a retailer that delivers from the store and you don't have accurate inventory at the store, that's a big problem. It's a lot easier to have accurate inventory in a warehouse than it is at the store level there, because a lot less theft, a lot less, you know, just misplaced items that aren't logged. There, a lot more people coming in and out. They're moving things. So it's a big deal regardless, but it really comes down for that individual retailer is where are you fulfilling those digital orders? But it's a big problem overall.
Here's a question that I don't think we can answer this. It says, any thoughts on stocks that might benefit from these trends?
Well, you know, I would say Home Depot and Lowe's is looking pretty good right now. I think buy the dip on Best Buy. I think Best Buy was down significantly. Their sales are down second quarter because they were appointment only there. So those are my two.
I'd say vendors that are fairly heavily focused on cloud-based software solutions are doing generally a lot better than the market.
And certainly those that are focused on the food, drug, convenience, mass area.
Yeah.
Do we have any commentary on Amazon's situation with the pantry? Comment was that Prime suddenly went from next day to 2 to 3 weeks due to shallow inventory levels.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really gets down to that's a great lead-in for our next webinar, which is really going to be about the new normal, what sticks and what doesn't. These customer journeys, these new customer journeys, there's a lot of talk about, gosh, I'm going to buy my groceries online forever now, because I do that. We actually saw worldwide, we saw the opposite of that. I was talking to a lady yesterday who said, I went to the grocery store for the first time in about 9 years during COVID because I could not get the stuff online. And I usually buy everything online. So the opposite of that. So yeah, so that experience has not been positive. It hasn't been good because of the inventory distortion stuff that's occurred and just the demand shortages for key categories. So yeah.
Okay, here's I guess a philosophical kind of question. Do you think retailers will have to go back and address some of the technology changes they put in just to be good enough to meet the needs during the shutdown?
Oh, there's no question, because right now a lot of those digital customer journeys are being done by smoke and mirrors. And they're losing 5 to 8 points per. So what they did is, we saw this with our mobile POS study that we did, is mobile POS has primarily been driven by the smaller retailers to date until COVID happened. And then all of a sudden, enterprise retailers started buying everything they could get their hands on to support all these digital journeys. And a lot of that was consumer level devices that they're buying just for a short-term period. And they're looking at the need, because particularly when you get consumer grade devices, when it gets to Wi-Fi and retail and warehouse situations, it's just not real robust. And it gets really challenging. If you ever tried to use your phone inside a Home Depot without their Wi-Fi, you understand. But the interference that's required there and the need for an enterprise class solution. But in that near term, when you're in a surge where things are up 600%, you just got whatever you can get your hands on. So I fully expect them to go back and do that.
And that is the last question that we have on the list here.
All right, super. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. And once again, those slides are up there now on the website. If you go to ihlservices.com, wanted to let you know, if you really have a passion about this topic, we are going to be releasing an updated full study here at the end of the month with a lot more details and looking at the data by segment and talking more about the solutions in those particular segments there. And then finally, just a reminder, our next webinar is the new normal. That will be on Tuesday, July 28th at 11 a.m. And we invite you to participate in that. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on the worldwide data at that point in time. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.